Chapter 5 Friends and Fear of Fire. G'day everyone, Rune here, and this is Chapter 5 of my What If Pokemon Raised Ash story. If you're new to this series, click the link in the description below to be taken to the playlist. Now let's begin the next chapter. Silence rings in the cavern in the wake of the boy Wild's introduction. Go, Chloe, and Gary had suspected that the forest boy was telepathic due to how Go and Chloe had found him, but there's a big difference between suspecting something and having it confirmed. Kid is the first to recover, introducing herself before introducing Go and Chloe. She then asks if any of them needs medical attention, as they'd been fighting that masked woman before they arrived. At this question, Wild's eyes widen in worry and guilt as he turns to Mew. Voice worried, he asks the Mythical about the injury they'd gotten at the start of the battle. Mew smiles softly at the boy, telling him that it was just a small cut. Wild's eyes narrow in suspicion before he pulls the pink Pokemon into his arms and marches right up to Kid, asking her to heal his Mappa. While Kid tends to Mew's injuries, Chloe asks what a Mappa is, earning her an elbow to the ribs from Go. Wild laughs at the sight, assuring the two that he's not offended or anything. Pulling up his legs, he sits cross-legged in mid-air as he explains that Mappa is a fusion of the words Mama and Papa. Mappa is non-binary, sweetheart. Wild smiles, thanking them for the help, before turning back to Go and Chloe, concluding their explanation with a matter-of-fact statement that Mew is his Mappa. Go asks how that works, earning him a semi-retaliatory elbow from Chloe, who attempts to frame the question in a much more tactful manner. Wild simply laughs, still floating in mid-air, though no longer cross-legged. He tells them that he knows he doesn't look like it, but he's actually a Mew. At the shocked looks on the humans' faces, he laughs again, before explaining that he'd gotten himself stuck in the form of a human when he was a baby. But he can still use his psychic abilities and moves like Aurasphere. It's at this point that the Pikachu still on his shoulder gives an impatient cough, drawing Wild's attention. Blushing slightly, he apologizes to the electric type before turning back to Go and Chloe. Smiling, he introduces the Pikachu as his brother Tumble. He then points to the Lucario, who's currently keeping a watchful eye on Kid as she patches up Mew's wound, telling them that that's their grumpy uncle and teacher, Rai. Deciding that his explanations are now done, he zooms up to the 10-year-olds asking who they are. Are they Pokemon trainers? Why did they come to the Tree of Beginning? Do they have those badge thingies that his Mappa told him about? How did they get so good at fighting? Have they been to other places in the world? Why does he get the feeling that he's met them somewhere before? Before he can continue his barrage of questions, he's pulled back by his braid by an exasperated, if amused, Rai. He shoots the fighting type a pout as he rubs where his braid connects to his head. Rai simply gives him a small smirk before turning back to the pair of 10-year-olds. Startling them with his own power of telepathy, he says that although Wild may be a little over-eager, he does have a point in asking why the group came to the Tree of Beginning. Now that they have a chance to answer, Go enthusiastically explains that he and Chloe are members of the Mystery Squad, a club that ventures all across the world in order to solve the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. Wild listens attentively, eyes wide with interest and fascination as Go continues to ramble about the club. By the time he's done, Mew has been completely patched up and Wild is almost vibrating from excitement. Throwing his hands in the air, he exclaims that the Mystery Squad sounds so cool! Smiling, Chloe asks if he'd be interested in joining. After all, they can always use more members. In his excitement at the prospect of joining the club, Wild completely misses the look of surprised confusion on Go's face. Chloe has never been the one to offer people to join the club. She's always been happy with it just being her, Go, and Gary. Noticing the look on his face, Chloe pulls him down by the front of his shirt so she can whisper in his ear. She tells him that they're not likely going to be able to come out all this way very often, if ever. It's pretty obvious to her that this is another situation like what happened with Coco. So they still need to solve the mystery of how this kid ended up here. Meaning they're going to need to be around him and his family if they're going to get to the bottom of this. And what better way to do that than if he's in the Mystery Squad? Completely oblivious to the conversation going on behind him, Wild turns to his Mappa, hands clasped and eyes pleading as Tumble does the same. Putting on his best begging voice, he asks his Mappa if he can join the club and be a world-traveling mystery solver too. Tumble pitches in, also asking to go. There's a long pause until Mew sighs. Alright, you can go. Wild and Tumble cheer. Provided Rai goes with you. Wild and Tumble groan. In a slightly whiny voice, Wild tells his Mappa that they're 10 years old already. Human kids can go on Pokemon journeys all on their own at 10. Mew gives their sons a stern look. Yes, they know that humans can go out on Pokemon journeys alone at 10. They remember when that became a tradition in the first place. They also remember when the minimum age requirement was much higher and for good reason. 10, in their opinion, is far too young for children to be gallivanting about the world with zero supervision from a responsible adult. They are either going with Rai or they are not going at all. Suddenly, Wild's petulant air is gone, replaced with something much more fearful. Biting his lip, he says that if Rai's with them, then Mew will be all alone. And if that masked woman comes back... Mew smiles softly at Wild as they run their paw through his fringe. Gently, they assure their children that they'll be fine. The heart flower that the woman had used in order to get into the Tree of Beginning shattered during the battle, so she no longer has any form of protection from the tree's immune response. If, and only if, she tries to come back, the tree will be able to fend her off. They'll be fine, so there's no need for either of them to worry. And as much as they may joke about not letting the boys go, even with Rai to keep an eye on them, they think that this might be good for them. With worries set at ease and everyone in agreement, it's not long before the group is ready to depart. With a final hug from their Mappa, Wild and Tumble follow their new friends while Rai follows along behind to keep an eye on the group. With every step, they get further and further away from the Tree of Beginning, and closer to an all-new adventure. A few days later, Wild, Tumble, Rai, Go, and Chloe arrive in Pallet Town, where they immediately make their way to the Oak family lab in order for the three newcomers to meet the final member of the club. Wild floats along above the ground-bound members of the group, his head swiveling every which way as he tries to take in this new place. This Pallet Town is so different from Rota. The houses are all spread out, with vast fields of grass, farmland, and trees between them. The road is mostly dirt, with a few cobblestone paths here and there. There's something familiar about the place that he can't put his finger on, even though he's certain he's never been here before. Maybe he heard about it from one of Mappa's stories? His attention is drawn back to the group below as Rai calls out to him. Looking down, he spots that they've reached a large yellow building with a red roof and a windmill attached to it. Below, Rai, Go, and Chloe are standing at an open door, waiting for him and Tumble to come down so they can go inside. Getting the message, he zooms down to them, Tumble holding on tight to his cloak. Once they're somewhat level with the others, they enter the building, with Go calling out aloud, "We're back!" The first to greet the group are an Eevee, a Sobble, a Yamper, a Grookey, and an Absol. Chloe kneels down to allow the Eevee and Yamper to jump into her arms, while the Sobble and Grookey climb all over a laughing Go. Before Absol carefully plucks the Grookey off of him like a Mother Glammeow, allowing Go to grab Sobble and stop his climbing. Wild snickers at the display, being reminded of how some of the younger Pokemon at the tree use their parents as jungle gyms. Welcome back. Wild looks towards the voice and spots a brown-haired, brown-eyed boy about the same age as the rest of the human and human-appearing company. This must be the third member of the Mystery Squad. However, before he can greet the boy, he spots the Charmeleon trotting along beside him, and the flame at the end of his tail. In an instant, Ash is floating above the door, back pressed against the ceiling. The brown-haired boy looks up at him with a raised eyebrow, asking if he's really that intimidating. Rai frowns in confusion as he sees where Wild is currently floating. Looking around, he quickly spots the Charmeleon and sighs, telling the boy that it's not him. At everyone's questioning looks, he explains that Wild is terrified of fire. He always has been. Wild's face flushes red as he tries to defend himself, stating that fire is scary. Gary, not wanting the awkwardness of the situation to get any worse, introduces himself to the Raven, acting like this is just a normal Tuesday for him. This earns him a grateful smile from the boy as he introduces himself in the same manner he had to Go and Chloe. Following Gary's lead, Go asks his friend where his grandfather is, as he's usually one of the first to greet them, since he's got Gary to help with the place. Gary explains that he's at a conference in Johto at the moment and won't be back for a few days. With explanations over, he leads the group to his computer room, where Wild immediately begins zooming around looking at all the new and interesting things around him. Rai keeps an eye on him from the ground, while Go, Chloe, and Gary talk about something in hushed tones near the door. He only stops as his attention is caught by a tap on his shoulder, as he's crouching on the ground to look at the weird things on the bottom shelf of a bookcase. Turning around, he comes face to face with the Charmeleon from earlier, who's now got a proud look on his face. With his tail, and thus the fire on it, out of his eyesight, he's actually quite relaxed around him. Cocking his head to the side, he asks if the fire type needs anything. Grinning broadly, he spins around with a proud ta-da, revealing the end of his tail, now with a wax-covered paper bag covering the fire, making it look like a paper lantern. Only there aren't any air holes in it. Wild's eyes widen as he rushes forward, grabbing onto the bag frantically. "Don't do that! You'll smother your tail!" He ignores Charmeleon's protests of "it's fine" and "I've survived worse" as he wrestles to get the bag off. When he finally manages it and the flame becomes visible again, he's back to the roof before he can blink, the bag still clutched in his hand. This, unfortunately, sets a pattern for the next few days. Charmeleon will attempt to cover up his fire in one way or another. Wild will panic because of the health issues that the method can and will cause the fire type, remove the cover, and then immediately move several feet away out of fear. About a week after the group first arrived, Charmeleon is sitting on the porch of the lab, trying to make a lampshade out of paper. He's just beginning to get frustrated with how his claws are hindering his progress when a voice suddenly sounds in his head with a gentle "hey." Looking around, he quickly spots Wild sitting on a wooden crate on the other side of the porch. Surprised, he simply nods in a return greeting before turning back to his task. There's a moment of tense silence before Wild speaks again, asking why Charmeleon is trying to hide his tail fire. Charmeleon gives him a look like he's questioning Wild's intelligence before pointing out that Wild is scared of it. He doesn't want Wild to be scared of him. Wild frowns at Charmeleon, his eyes determined and upset. He tells Charmeleon that he's not scared of him. Charmeleon points out how he refuses to come anywhere near him when his fire is exposed. Wild sighs, conceding the point, but insists that he's not afraid of Charmeleon. He's scared of fire. There's a difference. Charmeleon has done nothing to make him scared of him. Taking a deep breath, Wild admits that he doesn't even know why he's scared of fire. He just always has been. He's had nightmares about it for as long as he can remember, being surrounded by flames, crying out for help only for no one to come. He's sorry that his fear has hurt Charmeleon's feelings, but he doesn't know how to stop being scared of fire. Charmeleon shakes his head, telling Wild that he wasn't hurt. He can't help his fears, especially if he's had chronic nightmares about it for so long. He was more worried about his tail fire upsetting Wild. After all, it's not nice to have your fears constantly rubbed in your face. Wild says that it sounds like he's speaking from experience. Charmeleon gives a sardonic smile, asking if Gary or the others have told him about how they met him. At Wild's headshake, Charmeleon begins to tell him a story. A story about a little Charmander whose trainer had decided that he was too weak and, in order to get rid of him, had ordered the Pokemon to stay on a rock and wait for him to come back. For weeks, the little Charmander stayed on that rock waiting, afraid of failing his trainer again. He endured the cold and the rain, the hunger and the attacks from other Pokemon, all out of fear of being truly abandoned, unwilling to accept that he already had been. Eventually, the little Charmander had been found and saved by a group of humans, who took him in and gave him the hope to believe that he'd never be abandoned again. So, yeah, Charmeleon knows what it's like to have your fears rubbed in your face day after day. He refuses to do that to anyone. That's why he's been trying to hide his tail flame. Wild looks at him with tears in his eyes, saying that it's not fair that he had to go through that. And he shouldn't have to put his health at risk just because of Wild's own fears. That's not right. He admits to Charmeleon that he hates being afraid of fire. When his family was being attacked by the masked woman, he completely froze up at the sight of fire and became completely useless. His family needed him, and he just stood there unable to move or think. There's a moment of silence before Charmeleon asks if Wild would like for him to try and help him overcome his fear. Wild's head snaps to look at him, eyes wide with surprise. He asks if Charmeleon would really be willing to do that for him. Charmeleon nods, telling Wild that he'd be happy to. After all, he's one of the Mystery Squad now, so that makes them friends. Wild smiles back and gives him a cheery thank you. And that, everyone, is where I'm going to leave the story for now. Join me next time as the Mystery Squad embark on their first adventure with Wild, Tumble, and Rai as part of their team. I'm Rune. See you next chapter.